Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome in our SC100 Microsoft Cybersecurity Day 2 training session. My name is Saurabh Srivastava, and I am delivering this SC100 sessions. So yesterday, we started this SC100 Day 1 session, and we discussed very interesting topics. Now, before starting this Day 2 session, let's see what we have covered yesterday. A quick recap, and then we move ahead to what we have in Day 2. So in Day 1, we completed some topics moving around what we have in Zero Trust and best practice frameworks. We were talking about what we have in Zero Trust, what kind of Zero Trust components are involved there, what kind of pillars we have in this. We have 6 pillars in Zero Trust. Now, we are also discussing about Cloud Adoption Framework, CAF and WAF, well-architected framework. Then CAF and WAF, we're discussing about when we should use CAF and when we should use WAF. Cloud adoption framework is something where we have a cloud adoption journey framework. A company, if they want to adopt cloud, how they should move from starting where they are going to plan everything, how they have to check their own assets in their on-prem, how they have to start deploying the solutions in cloud, and if they want to migrate. Also, what comes in security, management, and governance. These all things comes under in cloud adoption framework. In WAF, well-architected framework we were talking about, we have a kind of framework where we can assess the current environment towards design and implementation perspective. So what kind of design we have right now? Basically, this well-architected framework will help you to assess the current environment. There would be a set of questions that would be answering, and then it will give you a kind of report that what are missing, what you can configure to enhance security. So not only for security, well-architected framework is designed for 5 different pillars, where we have cost optimization, operational excellence, and security is one of them. We're also discussing about what we have in MCRA, Microsoft Cyber Security Reference Architecture. That is a set of different kind of Microsoft technology reference designs that we can use to understand what can be used as native solution, how these different solutions are working together, how they are, how these are integrated to each other. That all things comes under MCRA. So this is good for selecting the right product for different solutions, different kind of design. And we were discussing about what we have in Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, MCSB. MCSB is basically a set of security recommendations. That security recommendations we see for different control domains, like for identity management, network security, and privileged access, and many other. We have around 12 different control domains where we see security recommendations for our current implementation in cloud. What kind of loopholes we have, what kind of security challenges we have, that we can see in MCSB. And this is very helpful to resolve these challenges, issues, what system or MCSB is detecting. These all topics we were discussing in our day 1 session. And definitely there was some homework as well, basically related to design a resiliency strategy for ransomware and other attacks based on Microsoft security best practices. So common cyber threats and attack patterns, ransomware protection, and design solutions for business continuity and disaster recovery, BCDR, including secure backup and restore for hybrid and multi-cloud environments, evaluate solutions for security updates. These are different topics I suggested that you can complete in your homework activity. Now, in our day 2 session, what we are going to start. Today, we'll talk about what comes in the same learning part: design, security, operations, identity, and compliance capabilities. We have 2 main topics: design solutions for regulatory compliance, where we talk about what regulatory compliance concept we have, translating compliance requirements into a security solution, also what we have in Microsoft Purview solutions, what comes in Microsoft Priva, considering Azure policy to address security and compliance requirements, also evaluating infrastructure compliance by using MDC. These all things comes under in this discussion. Then we have design solutions for identity and access management, where we have discussion moving around what kind of identity and access management solutions we have. We'll also talk about we'll design the solution for access to software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, hybrid, on-prem, and multi-cloud resources. What options we have for this? How we can secure our on-prem Active Directory domain service. Also, what consideration we have for B2B, business to business and business to customer, and decentralized identity. We'll also talk about what kind of modern authentication and authorization strategies we have, including conditional access, CAE, continuous access evaluation, risk scoring, and many other. Also talking about how conditional access and zero trust are aligned to each other, what comes in workload identities, and design solutions to manage secret keys and certificates. These are different topics that what we are going to cover today in day 2 session. Then we have homework. So for the same topics, design solutions for securing privileged access, we have these different topics available here. Design a solution for assigning and developing privileged roles by using the enterprise access model, identity governance in intra and ADDS, design a solution for securing administration of cloud tenants. Also talking about what comes in privileged access workstation and bastion services, evaluating the security and governance for Microsoft Intro ID, including PIM, privileged identity management, entitlement management, and access review. These are different topics that you have to cover under your homework activity. Also, here you'll see like entitlement management, what comes in privileged access workstation, some more design considerations here. In second topic, design solutions for security operations in SecOps, you'll see what comes in SecOps security solutions and design activities, what comes in hybrid and multi-cloud environments, SIEM solution that is very important. Also Microsoft Purview audit activities you will cover. So what comes in SIEM, SOAR, and XDR capabilities, these all things you will cover here in design solution for security operations, including these are the topics like security workflows, threat detection coverage, what we have in, we can say, industrial control system in MITRE ATT&CK matrix, what comes in translating compliance requirement to into security controls, Microsoft Defender for cloud related, what kind of benchmark and regulatory standards we have. These all things you will cover in your homework activity. And yes, you have lab activities. If you want to perform the lab activities, we have, if you have received lab access, so you can perform these activities there. But generally, these are very basic level activities like configuring intra ID, conditional access. If you are here in this SC100 training, definitely you will have idea about how to configure these components. But still, if you want to try your hand in these activities, you can perform these lab activities as well related to identity, governance, risk, and compliance. So now let's start with what we have in our day 2 agenda, day 2 topics. So the learning path is design security operations, identity and compliance capabilities. Now, the first topic, design solutions for regulatory compliance. Let's see what we have in this. So in regulatory compliances, in this concept, so the concept is moving around GRC, governance, compliance, and risk. GRC is definitely going to help organization to reduce risk and improving compliance components. How your organization is looking for compliance components, compliance should be configured, that we can achieve using these kind of GRC components. Here we include governance, what different kind of risk management we have, and compliance components. And definitely there are many different kind of solutions and services are involved. So different organization, they will have their own rules, practices that they want to follow. They would have their own risk management process and how they want to assess it, how they want to handle it. And every company would have their own compliance activities or compliance rules, maybe based on the region, based on the country, different kind of federal laws would be there that you have to follow as a kind of organization. So these all things comes under GRC concepts. So what we have in this, let's see. So when you are going to define regulatory compliance, what is this? You know very well, regulatory compliance is a kind of process, discipline that we have to follow in our organization based on, and this depends on different things like in which geographical place you have registered your company, under which country or region you are working. Depending on these different factors, regulatory compliance may be different. Differently here, when we talk about compliance, compliance is divided in two different kind of responsibility. Basically, it's a shared responsibility between the cloud provider and the organization. For example, my company is using Microsoft 365 or Microsoft Azure Cloud. So between my company and Microsoft, we will have a shared responsibility for the compliance component. Some configurations, some controls will be implemented by cloud provider from Microsoft, and something will be available in my control, in my organization's control that we have to configure. So for this, what we have a very good portal. We have Microsoft Purview, and there we have Compliance Manager, where we see a clear boundary between what kind of Microsoft or cloud provider responsibilities we have and what comes under organization, or especially if you're managing your organization's compliance component, so what comes under your responsibility. So these are different things that what we have. So these are shared responsibility that we see. Now, so when we talk about compliance journey is not a kind of one-time configuration. It's a continuous journey that you have to keep implementing suggestions, recommendations, what you see in your compliance area, compliance implementations. So definitely, this is the responsibility of cybersecurity architects to collect what kind of compliance posture we are looking for and what options we have available in cloud infrastructure that we can use to align our organization's requirement to these implementations. So here, some examples are there that we have many different kind of regulatory compliances like HIPAA, PCI, personal data, GDPR. And similar to this, Microsoft is following more than 90 plus regulations, 90 plus different kind of standards from global standard, from US government, from industry specific, from country specific standards. These all are available in Microsoft considerations, and whatever we have in Microsoft deployment in their cloud, from logical to physical design, wherever these standards are going to fit in, Microsoft is following these standards. And not only following, Microsoft, like these standards, they have provided attestation certificates to Microsoft for different kind of their own detections, their own testing. That you can go to, if you go to Microsoft compliance offering page, there you can see the list of what different kind of compliance offering we have, and you can read more about this. So like these are 4 different kind of standards where we see HIPAA, PCI, GDPR, personal data related informations. So different company, different organization, they follow different standards. For example, Healthcare application that process protected health information is subject to both privacy rule and the security rule encompassed within the Health Insurance Portability, basically Portability and Accountability Act. So this Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, is governing many things like how personal information or how health information will be processed. So if you are working in a kind of organization where you are interested or your organization is in this kind of business, so they will be following this HIPAA standard or PCI standards, payment card industry standard, like including Visa, MasterCard, American Express. These all will be following this PCI standard. GDPR, especially for European Union countries, general data protection regulations, they would be following this. So different country, different region, they have different standards that companies follow because they are, in that kind of business or in that kind of region. So we should plan. Definitely, if you talk about Microsoft perspective, Microsoft, they have already implemented their own responsibilities related to these standards. They have already implemented in Azure and in M365 place. What will be missing? That will be missing from the organization side. So you have to look into Compliance Manager and see what are the missing components for the customer side, and you have to implement that based on your requirements. For example, if there are 800 plus recommendations for customer, it's not mandatory to implement all these recommendations. Suppose we want to align only with PCI. So you will implement only PCI related recommendations or configurations to comply with PCI standards. So in this way, we use that Compliance Manager portal in Microsoft Purview to implement these different kind of regulations and requirements what we need. So it's very important to translate compliance requirement into a security solution. And for this one, this is the responsibility of security architect to define different kind of policy statements that will be aligned with the compliance requirements. So policy for how we are going to align with different standards. What are the business risks are involved? Also, based on this policy, this is the responsibility of security architect to design the guideline, document the guideline, what will be followed by the technical team, maybe for the developers, how they are going to follow this, what policy, what kind of recommendations you have designed. So design guidance is very important, where you as security architect, you are going to establish the architecture choices and design patterns. What should be followed in development? What should be followed in any kind of infrastructure as a service deployment? What should be followed in platform as a service deployment, and in many other places. And this is not, again, a kind of overnight task. It's a kind of process that you have to follow over time based on different type of business, based on different locations, different kind of requirements. We as security architect, we start identifying which different kind of policy and regulatory compliance we need, and related to that, what kind of implementation we should have from technical side, from development side, from different kind of platform, a specific configuration we have to implement. So what architecture we have, what tools we have to use, what feature you have to select, that all is going to be aligned with what policy or compliance requirements you are looking for. So it's very important to translate what compliance requirement we have in my company into a kind of design guidance. So what we see, what different components we have in this regulatory compliance solution, let's see. So to address compliance requirements with Purview, here we have different kind of Purview solutions. So basically, this is divided in three main components: Microsoft Purview Data Security Solutions, Microsoft Purview Risk and Compliance Solutions, and Microsoft Purview Data Governance Solutions. These are three different categories. Now, for the first one, when you talk about data security, data loss prevention, DSPM, data security posture management, information protection, insider risk management, information barriers, privileged access management, these all things comes under data security solutions, what we have. But when we talk about risk and compliance solutions, here we have, first of all, the compliance manager that presents current compliance posture related to your organization, your cloud environment, and that you can consider, you can use that to enhance your compliance posture to maybe more enhanced level. Apart from that, auditing, communication compliance, purview e-discovery, purview data lifecycle management, where we talk about retentions, and purview record management. These all different things comes under risk and compliance solutions. Apart from that, if you talk about data governance, purview unified catalog and purview data map, this comes under this category. So these are different kind of solutions what we see. And when we talk about this risks and compliance solutions, what we have, the first thing is compliance manager. So in Microsoft Purview portal, when you go to the solutions tab, you find compliance manager that gives you this kind of look and feel. Compliance manager assesses your current environment and gives you information about that what responsibilities we have for Microsoft and what responsibilities you have for you, for your organization. You can see in between these two, like shared responsibilities, Microsoft has already completed all the activities where we have a scoring mechanism. For every activity, we have scores. So Microsoft has completed almost all their scores. It means they have implemented almost all the requirements in compliance requirement in the backend. But from customer side, there are many recommendations. You can see there are 1,671 recommendations. And these are, you can say in a cumulative way, they are presenting 23,769 points. And out of this current tenant is only completing 1,266 points here. It means there are a lot of room for improvements, a lot of activities we can improve, we can implement, and we can move towards more compliance score. But it's not mandatory to implement all these. Maybe out of this, if we talk about PCI, payment card industry, maybe out of 1671, only 300 standards are 300 points, 300 improvement actions are only related to PCI standard. Or maybe if I'm looking for GDPR, out of this, maybe only 500 activities are related to GDPR. So we have to decide that which all activities I want to implement, and I will achieve that points here in this compliance manager page. So once again, it's not mandatory to implement all, but yes, based on the what kind of standard you want to follow, at least that standard related actions you have to configure, you have to complete in your organization, and you will achieve that point here in this scoring mechanism. This is a great tool where you can see the current posture. You can also create assessments. Like for example, if you say out of 1671, how I will know that how many improvement actions are related to GDPR. So for that, what you can do, you can go to assessment, you can create assessment for your organization, selecting the GDPR compliance, and then assess the environment based on GDPR, that what is implemented and what is missing. In regulations tab, you can see how many regulations Microsoft is following right now in this current organization. The list of regulations you can see here. And improvement actions will give you the current improvement actions based on what standard you have selected. Maybe this 1671 improvement actions is not related to GDPR. But when you go for assessment and you add assessment for GDPR, maybe this will be increasing, for example, by 300. So that would be 1971, including GDPR and plus existing recommendations. So when you click on any recommendation here, this will give you more detail, how to implement this, how to configure this, and what different kind of compliance challenges this will resolve. So this is a very helpful tool that you can use in your organization. The next is Priva. Address privacy requirements with Priva, what we have. In Microsoft Priva, now why we need this, what kind of benefits we have, let's understand. Now these days, privacy is the most important thing for every organization. And how much privacy is, we can say, is helpful, how this is important, everybody can understand. Like personal data should be processed in a proper, secure way. This should not be exposed to any unauthorized access. So for that, if you are going to perform these activities in your current cloud environment manually, like checking what different kind of privacy or important personal data we have, where we have exposure, these all things assessing manually is not very easy activity. So for this, Microsoft provides you Microsoft Priva that gives you privacy risk management and privacy assessment. Basically, this automates the discovery, documentation, and evaluation of personal data used across your entire data estate. Now we have automation for this. This is automatically going to detect all your data estate where this is exposed or is not properly managed. Now with this, you can see visibility into your organization data and privacy policy templates. You can apply policies, how you can reduce the risk. So these two works together. Like this will assess the environment, and then you can use this to create policies. Also, you can manage. You can use tracker scanning and consent management. Especially tracker scanning is a kind of tool that automate the identification of tracking technology across multiple web properties, driving websites privacy compliance in your organization. Also, consent management effectively track consumer consents across their entire data estate. So you can see it's a kind of dedicated portal, and you can see all these informations in one place. But this is also good for a very specific requirements, that is subject rights request. In many organization, in many region, this comes under employees' rights. That employee or the user, they can request information on how company is managing their personal data. That is something available in many regions. So employee can request to company, can you please tell me what is the state of my personal data and how much data you have related to my account, related to my personal details. So handling these requests is not easy. For that, Microsoft recommend use Priva, and here we have subject rights request. So we can automate these kind of data request activities. So for example, in any company, if there's a user, maybe Sam, and Sam is requesting, okay, please tell me what is the current state of my personal data in your organization. Using subject rights request, this would be easy. Instead of going to manually checking all the places and all the databases where we have Sam's data and in which format. So Priva is a very good tool that we use for this kind of requirements, where privacy assessment, privacy risk management, tracker scanning, consent management, and subject rights request capabilities we have. So when we talk about Microsoft Purview and Microsoft Priva, these are working together. So for example, in Microsoft Purview, what we do, we govern and protect your data using information protection, using classification, using DLP, we have auditing and many other things. Where Priva is designed for managing the data or privacy risks. This will provide you visibility on how your personal data or these kind of data privacy is there, and if this is exposed. So these two things works together. This gives you a unified solution for a more secure environment and more compliant environment. Now, what next? The next is Azure policy. When we talk about Azure resources, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, do we have some kind of control related to the deployment, related to what kind of, if you have some kind of compliance related to the implementations, how we can address, how we can enforce these things in Azure infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. For this, we can use Azure policy. So what is Azure policy? Basically, Azure policy is good for addressing security and compliance requirements. So basically, Azure policy can be used. Suppose I want to enforce something in my organization as a kind of compliance or requirements. Azure policy is very helpful in that. For example, in my company, there is a need, like whenever anybody is going to deploy any resource, that should not be deployed outside of West US data center. West US is a location in Azure environment. I want whenever in my company, anybody is going to deploy any virtual machine or storage or databases, that should be always deployed inside the West US data center. Manually, I can't enforce this, because if anybody is able to deploy the resource, he will be able to see the locations and he will be able to deploy these resources to any location, maybe to West US, East US, Southeast Asia, maybe in Australia and many other places. But using Azure policy, I can configure, I can apply a policy to govern this. In that policy, I can enable restriction as soon as my company IT admins or IT people, they are going to deploy any resource and they are selecting location apart from West US, policy will automatically give you error that this resource cannot be deployed out of West US location. So what actually I'm doing, I'm applying a compliance requirement, what I have in my company through Azure policy. This is just an example. And similar to this, we have many different settings that we can address, we can use in Azure policy. So what it does, this evaluates resources and actions in Azure by comparing the properties of those resources to the business rule, what I've created. And this policy can be applied to different level, like management group level, that is, you can say the very top level, where we can, if we can apply the policy to this, multiple subscription, which are the part of management group, they will be affected. But I can apply this policy to subscription level, to resource group level, or to the individual resource as well, if I want. So in the policy, we have two options. The one is policy definition. Policy definition is an individual policy that we can directly apply to any place. Or suppose you are planning to deploy multiple policies. For multiple policies, we can use initiative policy. That is a collection of multiple policies together. We call it policy set. So different kind of options we have. So we have policy definition. There's a dedicated policy. And then we have initiative policy. That is a combination of multiple policies together if I want to use it. So these kind of Azure policy options we have that we can apply to basically translate what kind of compliance requirements we have in Azure infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, into the different kind of policy format. So we can translate the requirements in my implementation. Now, what next we have? So to design an Azure policy solution to address security and compliance requirements, now what we have in this, you know what happens? Suppose you are going to create a kind of or apply any kind of Azure policy to your organization. For example, you are going to create a simple policy like no resource should be deployed out of West US region. So what will happen? Any new resource that any admin is going to deploy, that will not be deployed and give you error that this resource cannot be deployed out of West US. But what will happen to my existing resources? If they will be automatically deleted, or maybe they will be stopped working. No, they will not stop working, but they will give you information in Azure policy, and under a regulatory compliance section, you will find, suppose you have 500 resources that comes under or they are deployed out of the West US. So you'll see recommendations that these all resources, they are not following this policy. They are out of the implementations, out of the policy scope. They are voiding the policy. So you can not only control what you want to deploy, but also you can see the current state based on the requirements, which all other implementations are voiding the policy or they are not following the policy. In this way, we can maybe plan. Suppose I have deployed a VM in Southeast Asia, then I created a policy that no services or no resource should be deployed out of West US. So that VM that is in Southeast Asia will give me error. That will give you a kind of recommendation that this should be deployed in West US as well based on the policy. So then what I can do to resolve this, I can go to the resource properties, maybe changing that location, that resource policy location, that resource location to West US, or moving that resource from Southeast Asia to West US. And as soon as I will move that information on that resource that this is voiding the policy, that will be removed because now this is coming under the compliance. So these kind of options we see in Azure policy. If you want to translate the requirements. Now in policy-driven governance, we have three main components. So basically, not three main components, you can say Azure policy is the one of the very important component under this kind of cloud management, where we have enterprise scale architecture, Azure landing zone under CAF, and Azure policy is a very important component in this to address regulatory compliances. So what is enterprise scale? Enterprise scale is a kind of architectural framework that gives you guidelines how to deploy enterprise scale architecture following the best practices. Azure landing zone gives you framework that how you can isolate, how you can create logical architecture, different logical architecture based on subscription in your Azure environment. And Azure policy gives you capability that how you can address your compliance requirements in your implementation. These all three things works together, and then you can create a robust enterprise deployment where you are not only following the enterprise scale architecture framework, also logical isolation based on subscription, and also following your policies to enhance or achieve compliance requirements. These are different kind of framework that we have very in detail, you can say in detail documentations are available in Microsoft Documentation Center. So you can go for these kind of enterprise scale in architecture or Azure landing zone and also Azure policy to read more about this in case if you're interested. But once again, I would repeat the same thing. In SP100, we learn what different solutions are going to fit in different places instead of learning a step-by-step configuration of all these. So definitely you can access different documentations if you want. Now what next we have? So next is evaluate infrastructure compliance by using Microsoft Defender for Cloud. What is Microsoft Defender for Cloud? Microsoft Defender for Cloud is a Defender product, and this is specifically designed for Microsoft Infrastructure as a Service and Platform as a Service components. So MDC gives you regulatory compliance. You can see in regulatory compliance place, we have Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, and these recommendations under the MCSB, we have control domains. If you remember, yesterday we were talking about we have 12 different control domains related to network security, privileged access, identity management, network security, many different things we have. So we see recommendations related to the current state of the organization, what we have implemented. This gives you recommendations that we can resolve, we can follow the compliance related implementations. So MDC, like here we have policies and initiatives are there that how Defender for Cloud is going to assess the environment and security posture and compliance components. Not only this, but we can add other standards like ISO, PCI DSS, SOC TSP, NIST, and many other. If you want to assess the current environment, if they what is missing related to these other standards. So similar to Compliance Manager in Microsoft 365, for my Azure Infrastructure as a Service and Platform as a Service, we have this MDC that we access using Azure portal. So when you click on any option here, like click on network security, here we see a kind of cross. When you click on this, we see here what kind of missing configurations we have and how we can resolve this issue. That comes under Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Now, when go to the next, so design solutions for identity and access management, what we have. In identity and access management, so first of all, we all know that identity and access management, identity and access is very important component in any cloud or even in any on-prem environment. Identity is a kind of digital identification of any human, software, or any machine asset that we use to verify if the person who is trying to access any data or resource that is the right person and authorized. So for this, definitely we should have a kind of identity provider that will be involved in authentication and authorization activities. Doesn't matter you are using this in on-prem or you are using this activity, you are using this kind of component in cloud. So in cloud, we have Azure Active Directory system. Now this Azure Active Directory system is known as new name, that is Intra ID. In on-prem, we have Active Directory domain service for this kind of identity and access management components. So here we have two activities that any identity and access management provider performs: authentication and authorization. Authentication is a process where we verify the identity of any user, machine, application, software. And authorization is a process where system ensures that what level of access is granted to that authenticated user. So these two things will be always working together whenever any request comes to the identity provider. In cloud, in Microsoft 365, in Azure, for both, Intra ID is the backbone for all these kind of identity and access requirements. So when we talk about design cloud, hybrid, and multi-cloud access strategies, let's see what we have in Intra ID here first. So when we talk about pure cloud, in hybrid and in multi-cloud environment, we have many different kind of considerations. So when we start from here, the cloud baseline, it may be possible a company is only working in a cloud environment. They don't have any on-premises environment, no on-premises directory system. So there they can manage their identities in cloud very easily. This is known as a standalone cloud environment, a standalone identity environment. But if you have on-premises, In on-premises, you have Active Directory system. And in that Active Directory system, you have lots of user accounts, objects. So when you are going to use cloud, in that cloud environment, you are going to use maybe, you can say, you are going to utilize either creating the user account from scratch, or you can use directory synchronization capabilities where you are syncing your on-prem objects or Active Directory user accounts, groups, and devices informations to Entra ID. For that, we have to implement directory synchronization between on-prem and in cloud Entra ID. Now, apart from that, sometimes we see cloud hosted domain services. You know what happens? There's a very important point. In on-prem Active Directory system, we have Kerberos, NTLM, group policy, organizational unit support that we don't have in Entra ID. It means if you are maybe moving or you are syncing your objects from on-prem Active Directory to Entra ID, or if you have any application that you are syncing or you are moving from on-prem to the cloud, if that application is based on legacy component support, like group policy, NTLM, Kerberos, in that situation, that legacy applications, they will not work with Entra ID because Entra ID supports modern authentication options, modern authorization options. So in that situation, what we see? In that situation, we have cloud hosted domain service. In Azure environment, in Azure cloud, we can deploy Entra ID domain service is a kind of managed service where we deploy a managed domain controller and ADC, DC and ADC solution that gives you legacy support. So instead of keeping your on-prem Active Directory working and running, when you are migrating your application that needs legacy support, you can deploy Entra ID domain service, and there you can register your application. This will definitely reduce the dependency to keep your on-prem Active Directory system on, and your application will be working with the cloud domain services options. Now, also in a more complex design, suppose some company says, okay, I'm not interested to migrate everything from my on-prem Active Directory system to cloud and removing my on-prem environment. I want authentication should be performed using my on-prem Active Directory system, and my user will be authorized to access the cloud applications. Now, this is a complex environment where user authentication is happening in on-prem Active Directory, and authorization, they are getting authorized to access the cloud resources. So for that, we deploy Active Directory Federation Service, a complex environment where we get single sign-on capabilities and federation between on-prem and cloud, or you can say between on-prem Active Directory system and cloud Entra ID system. So from standalone to directory synchronization to cloud hosted domain service and Active Directory Federation Service, we are moving towards more complex design. It depends when I need these kind of requirements, and accordingly we deploy. So for this, if you come to this, compare cloud, hybrid, and multi-cloud access strategies. So when to use cloud baseline, pure cloud? When organization lacks on-premises identity solution, they don't have any Active Directory system, and plans on migrating workloads to be compatible with cloud-based authentication mechanism. In this case, you will have a pure cloud environment for the Entra identity system. But in case if you have existing on-prem Active Directory, in that situation, you should plan for directory synchronization. Also, if you are migrating the workload that depends on claim-based authentication, NTLM, Kerberos, or legacy protocol, in that situation, we can go for cloud-hosted domain service. And for federation, for single sign-on design, for more security, we can plan for Active Directory Federation services. So these are different kind of situations. This will help to decide which design we should follow. Now, so here, what we have in more understanding, let's see. So when you talk about directory synchronization with Microsoft Intra ID, what happens here? So basically in this, we use a tool that we use to synchronize my on-prem Active Directory system to Intra ID in cloud. Definitely, this is something very important if you are using Azure components, Microsoft 365, SaaS applications. So companies who are moving towards cloud, they definitely plan how they want to sync their on-prem Active Directory system objects to Intra ID, because it's not feasible to create all maybe 10,000, 100,000 objects again in Intra ID. So synchronization is the best option in this situation. For this, we use this tool, Microsoft Intra Connect Sync. This is a tool that we install in our on-premises, and then we connect my domain controller and we enable sync with my Intra ID. So here we have to install this. We have to configure the high availability for this as well, and many other things comes under picture in design considerations. And once this is synced, now the identity will be available in Microsoft Intra. So that then we can provide access, then we can provide different kind of control to these identities, or assigning admin rights and many other things we can perform. But Microsoft gives you another tool as well. That tool is known as Microsoft Intra Cloud Sync. Sometimes you say, okay, I'm not interested to deploy Microsoft Intra Connect Sync here, because this will be a kind of, here we need a very good hardware management. So if you are looking for very, you can say, less footprints of these deployments, so we can deploy Microsoft Intra Cloud Sync, a cloud sync tool that we deploy in cloud. And here we install a very lightweight agent only. That agent connects to the cloud sync tool. There we have a very minimal system requirement, and this will have a less footprints here. So these kind of options we have in this, Intra Connect Sync tool that we can use to sync my domain controller to this place. So we configure this Connect Sync tool, and definitely we can use this to connect multiple different kind of, forests. Multiple forests we can connect in from my on-prem environment to sync to my Azure environment. And it's a very good tool. Previously, it was known as Directory Synchronization Tool or Azure Active Directory Connect Sync. Now it's known as Microsoft Intra Connect Sync tool. So here you can say in Intra Sync, we have to install this tool in on-prem, and we have to manage high availability and many other things. But we have a tool, we call it Cloud Sync. In Cloud Sync, we deploy this tool in cloud in Microsoft Azure environment. And here we have to install lightweight agents in my on-premises, and they will be connected to the Cloud Sync tool and providing you the very simplified synchronization capability from on-prem to the cloud directory system. So it depends what kind of options you have available with you, and you can use that options. If you want to go for Intra Connect Sync, or if you want to use Microsoft Intra Cloud Sync. In both cases, you'll be able to manage directory synchronization without any challenge. Now, moving to the next. Now here we have cloud hosted domain service with Microsoft Intra Domain Service. Microsoft intra-domain service gives you another hosted service. Apart from intra ID, we have this available. We can configure this where this deploys a kind of a set of virtual machines in the backend, DC and ADC, and that gives you domain join, group policy, LDAP, Kerberos, and TLM authentication. So for example, in your on-premises, there was an application 1, that was tightly designed for on-prem Active Directory. When you migrate that application 1 to cloud, that application will not work with intra ID because intra ID works on different kind of protocol, different kind of standards, not on Kerberos, not on NTLM, not on LDAP options. So when you're migrating application from on-prem to the cloud, in cloud, we should have some solution that will support that legacy applications. And for that, we have this Microsoft intra-domain service that we deploy in cloud, and then we register my application, migrated application, to this intra-domain service to achieve this kind of compatibility. So for lift and shift strategy, this is very helpful. Like if you have any traditional web application or any business application that you want to use in Azure environment, we can consider using Microsoft intra-domain service. So these kind of options we see here in cloud hosted domain service, what we have. So you can see here, we have on-prem environment. We sync the user here. Now we have some application that we need to provide support for Active Directory system. So what we do, we deploy a managed domain service in cloud here, and we register that applications with this kind of domain service. Now, a good thing is if you sync your on-prem Active Directory to intra ID, so the same identity and these informations will be automatically synced to the domain service as well that you're creating. You don't need to add user here manually. So that's a good thing, that when you create intra domain service, whatever we have here in this intra ID, like domain, like user accounts, objects, groups, these all things will be automatically synced here to provide access to the applications or services which are connected to this. So this is actually a very good thing. Now, when we talk about specified requirements to secure Active Directory domain service, ADDS, what we have in this, let's understand. Question is, what options we have to secure our on-prem Active Directory system? Do we have something out of the box? So actually, we don't have anything out of the box. If you are going to use Windows Server, then installing this ADDS role, and then if you want to configure security for this, we don't have any kind of security solutions directly available for this. But yes, we can perform some activities to reduce the attack surface. Like, for example, implementing the least privilege administrative model. It means assigning Active Directory access to limited admins. Trying to secure domain controller against attacks, like implementing firewall, or maybe keeping the domain controller in a different kind of VLAN, or many other different kind of security components you can use. But by default, we don't have anything inside the Active Directory system or inside the Windows Server. We can also consider do not rely on single authentication factor. Always follow the multi-factor design. Never administer a trusted system from a less trusted host. Maybe companies can plan for creating a kind of management server or jump host, where you will be logging to that jump host first, and then after you will be accessing the Active Directory system. And implementing secure administrative hosts, maybe the same thing, where we have a very secure system from where we are accessing these very secure components. But apart from that, like these are only the considerations that we can follow. But we don't have anything like we can just use as a kind of security solutions. So for this one, Microsoft provides you Microsoft Defender for Identity. This Microsoft Defender for Identity is a kind of solution designed for on-prem identity related systems for ADDS, ADFS. Maybe you can include ADCS as well, certificate services as well. So to all the systems where identities are getting involved, or the systems where identity attacks are possible, we can use Microsoft Defender for Identity solution in cloud. This gives you a cloud dashboard, and we have to install Microsoft Defender for Identity agents or sensors to our Active Directory system, ADFS system, ADCS system in on-premises. With these kind of sensor, they will detect different kind of attack patterns, behaviors that is coming towards ADDS, ADFS, ADCS, and then you'll be able to detect it. You'll be able to see on dashboard, and then you can plan how you want to mitigate these kind of risks in your on-prem Active Directory system. One thing I would like to add here, that Microsoft Defender for Identity is not a protecting mechanism. It's a detecting mechanism. This detects, identifies, investigates the threats, but this is not going to automatically block the threats. For that, you have to plan that how you want to do it, how you want to implement the security implementations for Active Directory system, ADFS, and other systems in on-prem. So right now, we don't have any kind of automated protection options in this Microsoft Defender for Identity. Definitely, we have other options like Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Collaboration, Cloud Apps, but these are not related to the Active Directory security. For Active Directory, we have Microsoft Defender for Identity. So in this Microsoft Defender family, this is important. This is the right product related to the Active Directory domain service security. So here in Defender for Identity, what we have a Defender portal in cloud, and we install sensors, MDI sensors, Microsoft Defender for Identity sensors to all the eligible systems where we can see the identity related attacks. So when anything is going to happen, this will detect that kind of activity, send signal to the Defender portal, basically to identity portal. Identity will analyze this Defender will analyze it and gives you a result that what kind of attack pattern we have, what kind of lateral movement we have in that all things you see in this Defender for Identity dashboard. So for security professionals, you will get the signals, and this will help you where you can plan how you can proactively, secure your identity solutions. This will detect threats using real-time analytics and data intelligence. You can see what kind of actions we can take to remediate these kind of risks and issues. So when it comes, what kind of security options we have for our on-prem Active Directory domain service, we have Microsoft Defender for Identity. But what kind of security options we have for my intra-identity solutions or intra-identity objects? For that, we have Microsoft Identity Protection, or you can say intra-identity protection. That is a cloud feature and protects your intra-ID related identities. So never get confused. Defender for Identity is for on-prem, and intra-identity protection, that is for the intra-related identities. Now, when we talk about design solution for external identities, what we have in this? Let's see. So when you design a solution for external identity, what we have here, we have Microsoft external identity option. In external identity, we can configure settings for B2B collaboration, where I can invite my external users, external vendor, partner, suppliers, or external guests. I can invite in my intra tenant, and then after I can assign them applications access. I can assign them different kind of admin level access where they can perform activities. But sometimes we have to provide access to our business customer. like consumers, they will be accessing my applications and they will be using it. So in these two situations, especially when we are inviting these kind of guests in my own tenant, and we are going to grant access to them, this is something B2B situation, business to business situation. And for external facing applications, we are in the B2C, business to customer situation. So we have to plan how securely these external identities or external people, they can access applications, data, and how securely they can integrate, they can interact with the environment. So definitely for this, what we have for B2B, where I'm inviting vendor, supplier, guests in my organization, we can configure workforce tenant. A workforce tenant is a kind of configuration where we can bring our, basically we can bring information, we can add information about my external business partners, and we can enable integration between them, where in workforce tenant, your internal user can collaborate with external business partners and guests using the B2B collaboration options. This gives you easy interaction between your organization user and the guest user. So this is something like definitely we have to send the invitations and they will be accepting it. But in workforce tenant, we can control more settings and configurations related to this kind of B2B collaboration. But when we talk about B2C, business to customer, where we are presenting our own applications and customers are using it, in that situation, what we can do? We basically follow customer identity and access management CM solution. And this solution is presenting that we should create a dedicated external tenant. And using this option, we provide them different benefits. Basically, this CM solution gives you, you can present different kind of benefits to your customer, like self-service sign up, their own personalized sign-in activities that we can configure, and we can separately manage their identities in a separate external tenant, what we have inside our Azure environment. So these kind of consideration we have, we should always plan for these kind of things. While presenting our applications to the customer, we should plan for CM solution, and we can plan for dedicated external tenant for better control and a kind of isolated management environment, instead of bringing all this customer information to my default intra ID directory. So these are different things that what we see. Now, when we talk about modern authentication and authorization strategies, what we have. So in intra ID, we have modern authentication options. In modern authentication, Microsoft Intra ID is providing you different support, different kind of authentication activity based on a standard protocol like OAuth 2.0, OpenID Connect, OIDC, SAML, Security Assistant Markup Language. These are different kind of standard protocol that we use for authentication activities. We have token-based mechanism, strong encryptions. We have by default single sign-on available, multi-factor, conditional access. These all things we have in modern authentication place. Intra ID supports advanced password-less authentication options as well. Windows Hello for Business, Fido 2 security keys, Fast Identity Online version 2 security keys, certificate-based authentication, Microsoft Authenticator app, platform credentials for macOS. These all things we have available in Intra ID. That's why I was talking about if you are bringing any kind of legacy application from on-prem to the cloud, migrating it, and if that application is designed to use legacy Active Directory system design like LDAP, Kerberos, that application will not be working here properly. In that situation, we can plan for either recoding that application or using intra-domain service option in cloud. So single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, these all options we see. In authentication, we get three methods, especially for hybrid. When you are connecting to your on-prem Active Directory to the cloud in directory synchronization, you have three authentication methods that you can achieve, that you can use. The one is password hash synchronization. Second is pass-through authentication. And third one is federated authentication. I'll talk about this in our next slides. But apart from that, we have verified identity. Now, this is something becoming very popular now these days in IT industry. And here, how actually this looks like. For example, when we are talking about the real world, in real world, if you are going to access anything, maybe you want to travel to any other country, how you prove that you are the person? For that, you have a kind of government proved or government issued passport that you present to the airport authorities. Airport authorities, they trust this government body who is issuing these kind of passport to their citizens. Now, this is a very unique identification. Now, what if we are going to use similar kind of things in digital world? Because in digital world, using AI, it is very easy to fake anybody's face, voice, or any other identities. So now here what we have, we are using verifiable credentials where there are many third-party authorized, you can say, organizations. What they do, they collect information related to your identity like passports and different kind of other government-based authentication or the documentations, and they issue a kind of verifiable credential. That credentials you can present to any organization. Suppose you are going to join any company, and that company wants to verify that you are the actual person who is coming to or who is joining this post. There are two methods. Either companies should go for checking each and every document what you provide to them manually, or they will trust to a kind of organization where you have already submitted all the documents and data, and they have given you a kind of verifiable credentials that this organization where you are going to join, they can verify or they can trust on it. So these kind of verifiable credential situations, these options are available now that we can use, and this can fight with these kind of AI-based manipulations. So these options we have in Microsoft Entra ID, and definitely in future, when there's a need of any kind of advanced identity solutions where we have need of advanced authentication and authorization options, so definitely that would be also added in this Entra ID. Now, so when we talk about hybrid model where you are using Microsoft Entra Connect Sync tool to sync my on-prem Active Directory to the cloud, we can not only sync the objects, but we can sync the passwords as well in hash format. And in this situation, what will happen if the user is accessing cloud applications? So user will enter ID and password, and that will be verified here. But the same ID and password you can use to access your on-prem resources as well, because ID and password is same here and here. This is known as password hash sync authentication method. But when we talk about, let me go for this one, federated. Sometimes companies say that I'm not interested to sync my on-prem user passwords to Microsoft Entra ID because of security reasons. In that case, we sync the identity here, but we don't sync password. In this situation, we create a federation between Entra ID and my federation server here in my on-prem. Using proxy for security, we enable federation. Now what happens when user is trying to access application, Entra ID will ask for authentication here. But user, because the user is trying to access the application under a domain, intra ID will redirect your connection to go to Federation server and getting authenticated against your on-prem Active Directory. Once user is authenticated, that will provide a token to intra ID that I am authenticated, and then intra ID will authorize your account to access the resources. In this situation, intra ID is not having any kind of password here, but every time this will redirect your connection authentication request to the on-prem Active Directory system. And in this, Federation server will work in between to authorize the user. But this is a complex environment. Deploying Federation server, Federation proxy is a complex design. On the slide, like with some boxes, it looks easy, but in real world, deploying Federation server, ADFS, proxy, load balancing, and lots of things comes in picture. It's a complex design. So we have alternative of this. As an alternative, we have pass-through authentication. In pass-through, what we have, again, we have only the identity synchronization here, not the password. We keep password here. But we enable a feature in intra-connect sync tool that is PTA, pass-through authentication feature. This PTA installs agents, two agents. We call it pass-through authentication agents in your on-prem in this intra-connect tool. Now, what happens when user is looking for any data or resource access, your authentication request goes to intra ID. Now, intra ID, what it does, this will hold your authentication request, and now agents will check that there is a kind of authentication request in a queue. So agents will verify if the user information, if the user details are correct or not. If correct, then access will be granted. If not, then access will be denied. Now, you are achieving the same capability what you're seeing in this federation, but with the less complex design. So as an alternative, we can use this pass-through authentication. But one thing you have to consider here, that for third-party business applications or any application that you have in on-prem where that is connected to the Federation server, we cannot replace this Federation server for third-party applications or for any single sign-on things with this pass-through. Pass-through only works with intra ID and not for any third-party business applications. For third-party design, you should use Federation server for sure. So if you are in the need of like replacing Federation server that is only working for Microsoft Intra ID and these authentication options, so for sure you can replace your Federation server using these pass-through authentication options. So these are three things: password hash, federated authentication that gives you single sign-on capability as well, and pass-through authentication that you will get also the single sign-on capability here, but with less complex design. So these are the things that what we see in this kind of modern authentication option. What about authorization? So for authorization, Microsoft is using in Intra ID, we use different kind of modern authorization options. So for authorization, definitely there are different methods. Like Microsoft is using context-aware and risk-based policies. Also, we have attribute-based access control. We have policy-based management. We have dynamic and fine-grained entitlements. These are different kind of options we have for modern authorization. And for this, if you talk about the solutions, what we use, we have RBAC, we have conditional access policies, we have identity governance, where we have entitlement management, access reviews, lifecycle management. We have dynamic groups, privileged identity management, and global secure access. These all things we can consider for the modern authorization activities, modern authorization capabilities. So these are different options that what we have. Now, here So when we talk about modern access control, what we have, we see a central plane, a control plane, where we have the centralized services like Active Directory systems, Intra ID, and many others. That is by default there in every tenant. From IT admin perspective, they play here under this management plane where they configure synchronization, deploy resources, they work with multi-cloud environment, they deploy the workloads. Then we have user access where they are accessing the data, our API, our application access. These are different kind of components we see in a kind of cloud environment. So what we do here, we manage access control at every level. We design who can access control plane, who can deal with management plane, who can access data securely, which application will have the access to resources, and all things we control. And at every level, we have different level of control, starting with authentication and authorization, what RBAC options we have, different kind of attribute-based access, conditional access, and many other components we can plan here. So modern access control, this gives you the capabilities to control these kind of access at every level. And these all things moving around identity. When you have identity, we control on these identity options. We apply settings on these identity options in our organization. Now, what next we have? So in a zero trust perspective, when we apply adaptive access in zero trust design, again, you see here we have 6 main pillars: identity, device, applications, you can say infrastructure, you have network, you have data. So these are different kind of environments. So what different things we can use in this place? We can use different options, especially from identity perspective. User and identity can be managed under Microsoft Entra ID. And here, if you talk about devices, again, threat intelligence and device related different for endpoint components in Tune we can use to manage these. Now, also in my zero trust approach, Microsoft Intra conditional access, Intra ID self-service password reset, these all things we can consider here. For security related to the secure access, we have intra internet access, intra private access, security service edge we can implement. We can plan for labs, local admin password services. These are different things that we can plan to implement, and definitely this will help you to design access control, manage access control. Now, what next we have in this? Conditional access is a very helpful feature. In conditional access, we can design, we can definitely, we can configure how we can present different kind of access, different kind of control to my services based on conditions, based on different kind of, you can say, situations. For example, I want to disable any kind of access to any specific IP address, any specific user, or any specific kind of based on a group, location, or device type. So these are all things we can achieve in this conditional access option. So conditional access is very helpful, not only to decide how I want to present the access or enable the access to my SaaS applications, as already applications, connected applications, or if you want to block legacy protocols, or if you want to enforce something in my organization, like suppose I want to enforce MFA should be enabled for everyone, or these different kind of other settings. that we can use. For that, we can use conditional access. So conditional access is going to prevent your organization from different things like password spray attack, any kind of hacker attacker they're trying with unauthorized access. So these different things we see here in conditional access. So conditional access basically depends on what signals we are going to collect from here. So if you are going to collect signals, like if you configure policy, in policy we configure what signal I want to target, like user allocation, devices, applications, risks. Like if user is in high risk, if the sign-in is in a risk activity, based on that, we can create policy. Like you want to allow the access to the resources or block the access, or I will want to enforce the user that change the password, or I want to enable that I need MFA, like this policy need MFA to be verified first, then only applications and data will be provided. So these things we see under conditional access that we can implement. Also, for my identity, we have intra-ID identity protection. Intra-ID identity protection is a kind of premium feature that comes under intra-ID P2 license. So basically, we have 4 types of license. The one is free license that comes with every different kind of Microsoft 365 for Azure tenants. Second is P1, Premium 1 license with some advanced feature. P2 license, Premium 2 license gives you identity protection and governance. In that governance, we have entitlement management, access review, privilege identity management that comes under P2 license. And apart from that, we have one more that is related to the intra-governance license, where we have advanced governance components. So for P2 license, you get this identity protection. And here, this is a very advanced feature in Azure that is going to detect any kind of unexpected behavior related to your identity, attacks, and many other things. And using this option, we can, whatever the detections here we have, that we can attach with conditional access. Basically, this detects risky user, risky sign-in, risky applications. And basis on this, you can create a policy how you want to deal with this. If you want to create conditional access policy, if you want to analyze it, we can send these signals to Sentinel. Maybe we can transfer these signals to third-party SIEM solutions. We have a reporting dashboard where we see all these informations like risky user, risky sign-ins, risky application. These are all things we see here. So identity protection is a kind of feature, is a kind of benefit that we see in P2 license, where conditional access will be very beneficial because here we have machine learning and AI-based detections. And this detects many things like unfamiliar location login, or maybe unexpected behavior on user activity. User is trying to log in from a Tor browser, any unfamiliar location, risky travel, any unexpected travel activities. These all things are being detected by identity protection in AI and machine learning based design. So it's a very advanced detections for identity. So we can combine identity protection and conditional access together. So what basically we are getting from this identity protection, like risky user behavior, risky sign-ins, risky applications, we can create policy in this, and we can decide if we want to block the user, I want to enforce user to change password, I want user to complete the MFA first. That all things will be very helpful. So these are the things that what we see in this identity protection component. Now what next we have? So in next, we can align conditional access and zero trust together. Like zero trust says verify everything. Okay. So never trust, always verify. This says verify explicitly, verify each and everything, every access. So any identity, any device is trying to access data, applications, infrastructure, network. Conditional access fits here. This will be sitting here in security policy enforcements. Using conditional access, we can implement this, and we can grant access only when a proper verification, a proper policy enforcements is there. So conditional access is tightly aligned to zero trust approach what we follow. So in zero trust, conditional access can be used to verify explicitly. We verify each and every request. We can configure conditional access for my Azure resources, applications. We use least privilege access. So conditional access can be enforced to access the resources directly or checking what level of access the user is having. Also, what different kind of risks are involved, like sign-in risk, user risks. We can use conditional access based VPN to access the resource, restricting access to the level of the applications or DNS names. We can publish our applications using application proxy, using conditional access for protections. Conditional access can be aligned with your application protection in zero trust. And also we always work with assume breach. So we can segment network infrastructure at network level. We can use minimal use of enterprise PKI, the on-prem or enterprise public infrastructure. Always be dependent on what you are getting in Azure environment or intra ID place. Always migrate to single sign-on from ADFS to password hash synchronization. Now, this is something that you can go to PHS in a hybrid model, or you can go for password authentication for better security. You can minimize the dependency on DC, domain controller in on-prem, that is using Kerberos KDC in Azure in Azure AD. So if you're using any kind of on-prem, or if you're using Azure intra-ID domain services, try to move towards moving towards modern authentication and authorization to have more security on it. And definitely, you can move the management plane to the cloud that I was talking about, moving towards intra-ID to modern authentication. And for devices, use Microsoft Endpoint Manager to manage your devices. So the more advanced options and feature you're going to use, more security you will find around that kind of identity and devices. Now what next? Secure access for workload identities. What we mean is here in intra ID, we have different types of identities. When you talk about human identities, for human identities where users are using it directly, like internal user, external user, like guest, partner, customer, and so on. Sometimes we don't need to use human identity for different kind of access. So in that situation, we use workload identities, or you can say machine identities. In machine identities, we have workload identity. Sometimes we assign identity to virtual machines, to services, to applications. For example, virtual machine wants to access any storage for any activity. So are you going to add your ID and password as a human user adding password every time here? No, I can grant one identity. I can assign one identity to a virtual machine, and that virtual machine will be using that identity to log into or connecting to storage. The storage will be designed to authorize that access and working together. So in workload identity, basically we assign this identity to application or service. So we have service principal, uses intra ID for identity and access, functions, application developer, they manage the credentials. They add these credentials inside their application development, application code. In manage identity, a service principal manages an intra ID that eliminates the need for app developer to manage credentials. So in that case, we can design a kind of service principal that would be tightly integrated to the workload here. And in that case, that identity will be never exposed to the developer. But yeah, in the process, that would be using it and accessing other resources. So that kind of options we have in workload identities. Also, when we talk about devices, we have different types of device support in intra ID. The one is intra ID registered, that supports you bring your own device. We have intra ID joined, that is pure organizational device. And then we have hybrid joined. Devices are joined that is connected to your on-prem and also your intra ID that goes under hybrid join option. So these are three different types of device options available in intra ID that we can manage. Now, what next we have? So when we talk about design a solution for workload identity to authenticate and access Azure cloud resources, so what happens? So in workload identities in Microsoft Intra can be used as an application which enables a web application to access either on behalf of the user or application Microsoft Graph based on admin or user consent. So for example, I have one application that I want to ask, that application wants to access something. I can use one identity, maybe for that resource in the backend, I have to use one identity. Generally, we use user identity, but we can create workload identity that we can assign to application, and that application can access that resource without any kind of manual interaction. So what we do, sometimes we create a service principal that developer can use to enable a CI/CD pipeline to deploy a web app from GitHub to Azure App Service. Because we need access to the Azure App Service to deploy the application. So service principal can be used and developer will be using that to deploy the services in Azure. Where a managed identity that a developer can use to provision their services with access to an Azure resources without having to manage any credential. In that situation, your managed identity probably you are going to manage in Key Vault. You will store that, and developer they need only to request that identity while deploying the resources in Azure. So from the developer perspective, you don't have any visibility on that credentials, but whenever the process is going to access the credential, this will fetch the information from Key Vault and then apply the resources in the backend environment. It would be easy, more secure, and much easier option. So these things we see here in workload identity design if you want to authenticate and access Azure cloud resources. Now, what next we have in this? Sorry, I have to go to the next. Yeah. So here to workload identity, we use Key Vault. In Key Vault, we store our secrets, keys, and certificates that we can store, and we can fetch it, we can access it based on requirements. So to store your secrets, keys, and certificates securely, you can consider using Key Vault. Applications and services can access their sensitive data without need of hard-coded credentials or manual secret management. You don't need to hard code or you don't need to add your credentials hard coded in your application code or application design or services. I can configure this in a way like suppose service A is willing to access service B, and service B can be only accessed using the one credential. That credential I can store in Key Vault. So whenever A is looking for the access to service B, A will request to Azure Key Vault, get the credential, present this credential to service B, and service B will be accessible for a secure management. So this kind of integration enhances security and simplify the management where you don't need to manage a local security identity in your service or in your application. So this is something very helpful when you are talking about any kind of key management. Now here, when we talk about managing the keys, security keys, secrets, and certificate, if storing my secrets, keys, and certificate, this is secure in cloud? Answer is yes. So first of all, we have different level of control, different level of, you can say, advanced services to secure your keys or to keep your secrets safe in Microsoft data center. These are available in different type of plans. By default, we get Azure Key Vault standard tier. This is a kind of software-based management to manage your keys, certificates. That is a FIPS 142 level 1 validated. It's a software-based. Then we have option to select Key Vault premium tier. In a premium tier, it's a multi-tenant HSM. Now, this is a hardware security module that we use. And this is a kind of, you can say, 142 level 2 validated. But this is for multi-tenant. Multi-tenant means multiple organizations, they will be sharing the same platform in the backend. What if you say, no, I want something where only my tenant keys will be stored, not the other tenant keys? In that case, go for Azure Management HSM, that is FIPS 140-2 level 3 validated single tenant HSM offering. In this, only your keys will be stored and no other multi-cloud option will be there. What if you say, I need not the software-based, but hardware-based control? So here we have Azure dedicated HSM, that is again FIPS 140-2 level 3 validated bare metal HSM offering. This is something that customer can lease general purpose HSM appliance in Microsoft data center, and you have to pay for that. So now you will have a dedicated hardware where your all the secrets will be stored, more security. And if you want like these kind of different dedicated HSMs, if these are going to be certified, these are going to be compliant with other payment card industry HSM version 3 base standard, if this should be compliant with PCI DSS and PCI 3DS, in that case, you can go for Azure Payment HSM. It's specifically designed for the payment industry. So this is very interesting that we have options for different level of security and you can plan for it. The more you pay, the more advanced security options you see in this Azure Key Management, Azure Key Vault Management. So from software multi-tenant to software-based, basically is a general purpose. Now, if you want to go for higher level of, again, you can go for multi-tenant HSM, hardware security module will be there. Now, software-based single tenant, if you're looking for a dedicated hardware HSM appliance, go for this. And if you're looking for the dedicated hardware HSM appliance, should be PCI DSS, PCI 3DS compliant. So you have this option here that you can use. Now, these are great options. But here we have some kind of best practices that we should follow. These are use separate key vault when you have different regions. So you can use vault per application, per environment, and per region as well. Depending on, you can create multiple key vaults. You can control access to your key vault using RBAC. You can decide who can access key vault and what level of access of key vault would be there. You can turn on firewall, virtual network service endpoints, many other security options we have. You can turn on data protection for your vault. You can turn on purge protection. What if you're storing the data in key vault and somebody by mistake, the person is going to delete the entire key vault? In that case, all the data will be deleted. So you can enable purge protection that will protect against malicious or accidental deletion of the secrets and key vault even after soft delete is turned on. You can turn on the logging, what activities are going there, and you can enable backup. In scenario when purge protection is not possible, maybe you can plan for creating a backup for vault object on regular basis. So at least when you have a situation where malicious or accidental deletion you see, you'll be able to restore your secrets from the backup. These are guidelines that we should follow. Now, so what are the key takeaways to manage secrets, keys, and certificates? Always follow the best practice to ensure security of the key vault. Authenticate and authorize access to key vault, that who can access and what level of access I want to enable, because there will be different informations like keys, certificates. So what level of access you want, like you want to enable access only for read, you want to enable access to write as well, that different levels you can configure. You can also configure restrict network access. And you can securely manage certificates inside the key vault. Also, you can plan for backup. You can plan for purge protections. These all things you should consider while managing these kind of key vault related configurations, key vault related implementation. So definitely, this is very interesting, is very helpful option. Now, so that's all what we have in day 2 session. Here, we have this homework. That homework you have to complete. Now, after discussing about all these, you'll have design solution for securing privileged access. When we talk about where you go for homework activities related to identity governance in intra and ADDS. We'll also work with what we have in intra-ID, including PIM, entitlement management and access review, that is coming under P2 license. Also what we have in privileged access orchestration, PA, including remote access that you can control using partition services. Also in second, design solutions for security operations. You have security operations, SecOps related introduction, design security operations capabilities in hybrid and multi-cloud. So we're talking about this in the starting as well. This homework you have to complete. So you have to also complete this homework for SIEM solution, what comes in SOAR, XDR, and SIEM. Also, what comes in ICS, MITRE ATT&CK, and what kind of other components we have in Microsoft Priva, Azure Policy, Defender for Cloud. These all things you have in this homework activity. So you have to complete this homework activity, and this will give you more understanding related to this day 2 component and in this SC100 related discussions and topics. So just to summarize once again what we have completed today, we completed design solutions for regulatory compliance, where we are talking about what different kind of regulatory compliance options we have, why this is important to translate compliance requirement into security solutions, why it's important to address compliance requirement in Microsoft Purview using Compliance Manager, what is Microsoft Priva, why we should use it, what comes in Azure Policy, how we can use Azure Policy to address security and compliance requirements. Also, what is Microsoft Defender for Cloud? Then we move to what comes in identity and access management. Here we're talking about what comes in a pure cloud environment, what we have in directory synchronization, what we have in intra-ID domain service, what we have in federated authentication design, or federated environment. These are different things we see here. We have already completed designing a solution for SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS hybrid model. Also, how we can configure different kind of requirements for securing the Active Directory domain services. For this, we're talking about we have Microsoft Defender for Identity that we can use to secure our on-prem, not secure, but basically monitor what different kind of attack patterns we are seeing for my Active Directory domain service, for my ADFS systems. Also, we're talking about what comes in external identity in B2B and B2C design. What comes in modern authentication, authorization strategy, including conditional access. What is risk scoring and many other components. Sorry. We're talking about how conditional access and zero trust is aligned to each other. Also, what comes in workload identity and how we can secure it using Key Vault. I can keep my workload identity safe in Key Vault and I can keep it secure. I can control who can access Key Vault, at what level of access we have. We're also discussing about what different kind of Key Vault versions we have, like software-based, multi-cloud, software-based, hardware-based multi-cloud, or maybe a bare metal dedicated device for your requirements, or maybe any bare metal dedicated device that is PCI DSS and FIPS standard compliant. At all things we can achieve if we are implementing Key Vault in Azure environment. So these all different things we were discussing here, and we have completed this day 2 agenda. Now here, definitely we'll talk about what we have in day 3. In day 3, we have discussions related to more advanced topics, more components. So I would say thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to complete homework activities if you get time. And definitely, if you have any question, any query, utilize our question and answer place to ask these. So once again, thank you so much for joining. Have a nice rest of the day and keep learning. Bye-bye.
Technology is moving fast. Closing the skills gap can help your team optimize and stay focused on what's ahead, rather than constantly playing tech catch-up. That's why it's important to keep Microsoft certifications active. Here's everything you need to know about renewing your team's certifications. We have introduced a free certification renewal process for role-based and specialty certifications to help you stay current with skills you need to remain up to date in your job role. Please note that the fundamentals certifications do not expire. In order to renew, you don't need to schedule and take an exam through Pearson VUE. Assessments are shorter than the exam. We encourage you to renew early, as soon as you are eligible. You won't lose time by renewing early, as the extension date is not based on the date that you choose to renew, but 1 year from certification expiration date. To access renewal assessment, you need to connect your certification profile to your Microsoft Learn profile only the first time. Once connected, you don't need to repeat this step in future to access renewal assessments. You can take the assessment as many times as you need. But after the second try, you will need to wait at least 24 hours before your next attempt. Embracing a growth mindset and the need for continuous learning can help you optimize and successfully perform in job roles. With a renewed Microsoft certification, globally recognized and industry-endorsed evidence of mastered real-world skills, you will also be able to demonstrate your proficiency in keeping pace with technology,